Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Vale. In today's episode, we're going to look at how the first Christians didn't say the sinner's prayer. The prayer that millions of people have said to become Christians did not exist for most of Christian history. The words just simply were not there, and neither was the assumption underneath them that you could close your eyes, repeat a few sentences after someone, and then you walked away saved. Now, if you grew up in church, you probably know it by heart. Lord Jesus, I know I'm a sinner. I believe you died for me. Come into my heart. And it was probably some version of that, prayed around a campfire or with every head bowed and every eye closed. I see that hand. I see that hand. For a lot of people, that prayer is the hinge a whole life turns on, the line between the before and the after. So here's the weird part. If you went back to the year 250 and described that prayer to a Christian, they would not recognize it as the way a person joined the faith. Because what they were doing took time and was far more demanding than anything you could fit on the back of a salvation cart. So here's the scene. It's a city in North Africa. Early 3rd century, it's still dark, hours before sunrise, on the Saturday night before Easter. And a man named Felix has been coming to the Christian community for 3 years, which was normal. Joining was not a weekend decision. It was closer to an apprenticeship. Years of showing up and being taught and being watched to see whether he really meant it. And for most of that time, Felix was not even allowed to stay for the whole gathering. There was a point in the service where the unbaptized were sent out, and they left before the shared meal and the prayers that belonged only to the family. Felix stood on the other side of that door for years. Now it's the night before Easter. He's fasted all day. He stands at the edge of a pool of water with the rest of the candidates. They take off their clothes. They turn to face the west toward the dark and renounce the devil out loud by name. Then they turn east toward the coming light, and they're lowered under the water 3 times while they're asked whether they believe in the Father, in the Son, and in the Spirit, answering from inside the water each time. They come up, and for the first time in 3 years, Felix is handed bread and wine that now belonged to him and allowed to pray the prayer reserved for the family. The 2 words he has waited 3 years to say out loud are finally his: Our Father. This was how a person became a Christian in North Africa. It took years, and it ended with a burial and a sunrise in a pool of water before the city woke up. And we're not guessing about any of this, because the instructions survived. There's a document called the Didache, probably written before some of the New Testament was finished, and it walks through baptism. Teach the person first, have them fast, then baptize them. There's Justin Martyr, writing around the year 155, to explain Christianity to a Roman emperor who assumed it was a cult. He describes how a person is made new. They're taught. They commit to living differently. They pray and fast, and then they're washed in water. The washing is the moment. A century later, there's a detailed order of service, often connected to Rome, that lays out the whole process. Candidates were examined when they first asked to join and examined again later. The instruction could run as long as 3 years, and the people teaching could extend it if your life did not match your words. Sponsors had to vouch for you, and the community had to agree you were ready. You couldn't talk your way in. They watched how you lived, whether you stopped going to the arena, how you treated the people who served in your house, whether you would give up work the church considered incompatible with the faith. And there was a long list of jobs that disqualified a person. Becoming a Christian cost you something visible before anyone let you near the water. And underneath all of that was something that was forming, something that was happening to you. Paul had written that baptism was being buried with Christ and raised with him. And the early church took that at full weight. Going under the water meant dying with him, and coming up meant being born, the way a person is born once and cannot undo it. So when did all of that turn into a prayer you could say in 30 seconds with your eyes closed? The answer is a man named Charles Finney and a piece of furniture. Finney was a lawyer in upstate New York who became a preacher in the 1820s. And he did not think much of waiting around for God to move. To him, a revival was a result you could produce, the same way a farmer produces a crop. And he pretty much said as much in print, calling it the right use of the right means rather than a miracle. So He engineered the means, and the most famous one was a bench. He set a pew at the front of the room and called it the anxious seat. When the preaching reached its peak, he invited anyone under conviction to get up, walk forward in front of everyone, and sit on that bench as a public sign that they were deciding for Christ right then. The walk became the point. A body moving down the aisle turned an invisible decision into a visible event you could count. And in Rochester, over the winter of 1830 and 1831, this worked on a scale that no one had seen. It was like the whole city seemed to turn. And Finney's methods, they spread across the country fast because they delivered numbers. For 17 centuries, the moment a person became a Christian was a washing the church performed on them, usually after a long wait. In one generation, Finney moved that moment inside the person where it happened in an instant, and the outward sign shifted from water poured by the community to a person's own feet carrying them down the aisle. What had taken years now took minutes, and what the church had once done to you became something you did for yourself. And that prayer, that's the last piece, but it comes later in our story. Finney supplied the walk down the aisle. Dwight Moody, the great revivalist of the late 1800s, took the decision model and built it into a machine that filled arenas. After Moody came Billy Sunday, a former professional baseball player who told crowds to come forward and shake his hand as a sign they had decided. By then, the walk even had a nickname, Hitting the Sawdust Trail. And then came Billy Graham, and the radio and the television. Graham closed every event the same way, with every head bowed, every eye closed, and a long, slow invitation to get out of your seat while the choir held a single hymn for as long as it took. Millions came. His team needed a way to let all those people know what to do next, something simple enough to print out by hand, by the truckload. So the words got standardized. Campus Crusade put out a small booklet in the 1960s that ended with a suggested prayer to receive Christ, and tracts carried their own versions. The wording is a form most of us know. Admit that you're a sinner, believe that Christ died for you, and ask him into your heart. And that last line, asking Jesus into your heart, it's leaning on a verse in Revelation about Christ standing at a door and knocking. The problem, though, is that that verse was written to a lukewarm church, not to a single person at a crusade. But it gave the prayer picture, and that picture stuck. And by the time most of us were born, the whole thing felt like this is just the way it's always been done. In truth, this version was younger than a light bulb. Now, none of this means the prayer is empty. Like, people have met God in that moment, like really met him. The Spirit does not wait for the church to follow some correct procedure before showing up. And plenty of faithful people can point to a folding chair at a summer camp as the night their life turned. However, something was traded in the move from the pool to the prayer card. The early church made it almost impossible to become a Christian by accident. You could not drift in, because the waiting, that was part of the filter. By the time you went under the water, you had counted the cost in the open, in front of people who would know if you walked it back. The instant prayer removed the weight, and when you remove the weight, you remove the filter. Without it, a person could say the words, feel something emotional in the moment, but still be no different the next morning. And we have language that speaks to this. People talk about praying the prayer as a kid and then walking away from everything it was meant to mean. Or others, they wonder whether it counted, and they say it again just in case. In some of the Pentecostal circles I grew up in, you always had that one person who thought they had to get re-saved each week. The early Christians didn't have that anxiety. And not because their faith was easier than ours, and if anything, it was not. They had simply never put the whole weight of salvation on a single remembered sentence and moment. They put it on a washing the church could point to, on a community that had walked them to the water and kept holding them to the yes they spoke in it. You didn't have to wonder whether you had done it right. You had been buried in front of the whole community on a specific morning with witnesses in an actual pool of water you could walk back and stand beside years later. Put the two side by side and you can see the trade. We kept the moment of decision, but lost the years that used to lead up to it. And then the decision itself slid quietly from the church collectively to the individual until the thing a community once did to a person became something a person does alone, eyes closed, crossing their fingers, hoping it took. And okay, maybe that was a fair trade. A faith that demands 3 years before the water was never going to fill stadiums, and perhaps the door had to be widened for the room to fill. But you do not have to undo any of it to ask the question Felix would have asked, standing at the edge of that pool in the dark. When you say that someone got saved, what do you actually picture happening to them? A sentence they repeated with their eyes closed, or a washing they will remember for the rest of their life? The first Christians would tell you those are not the same thing, and they spent 3 years making sure a person knew the difference. Hey, this is the Theology Made podcast. If this has been helpful or encouraging, please like and subscribe and share with someone who would enjoy this as well.